Hi everybody, welcome to Talking Automotive. My name is John Sinclair and my co-host Mark Palavestra.
Thanks, John. Today we've got Michelle Denogean, the Chief Marketing Officer from Roadster in the US. Roadster are an omnichannel digital platform for the auto industry for dealerships. And Michelle shares some very powerful information with the insights that she's seen from the COVID situation, the change and move to more digital transactions, but more importantly, how each transaction is different. So it's not just a pure 100% digital play. It is interacting digital with the dealership experience and actually improving efficiencies where the sales per units sold per sales consultant has moved from 10 units up to 18 units. And customer satisfaction has increased significantly. Some very powerful information that she shares, all supported by some very strong data.
Yeah, Mark, what is fascinating for me is that the sales process is no longer linear, where the salesman works with one customer from beginning to end and delivers a vehicle. He's now working with multiple customers at different touch points, and it's happening in the customer's own time at night when the dealership's closed. So very fascinating. And I think this is the way things are going to go. And so it's a really worth a listen for dealers. Let's jump into it.
Talking Automotive, analysis, identification, and implementation of profit opportunities for the automotive ecosystem.
With 30 years' experience in auto logistics and state-of-the-art locations in 5 major Australian cities, Precar Fleet Services is an independent division of Precar Services, offering specialty fleet fit-outs for commercial applications ranging from simple tray and tow bar fitments to fully bespoke service body and accessory installation. With quality-assured safety, compliance and standardisation of vehicle builds, Precar Fleet Services are a premier all-in-one solutions provider for commercial vehicle fleet operators, leasing companies, and original equipment manufacturers. For further information on how Precar Fleet Services can assist in solving your commercial vehicle fit-out needs, please visit precar.com.au and click on the link to Fleet Services.
So John and I talked about it just yesterday. It was just really powerful stuff that really resonates as to where we need to go as an industry. Mm-hmm. And that's why you guys and the adoption in the US is so much faster and you're so far advanced versus us here. We're still thinking that online listings for used cars is a good thing and that's cutting edge. But the whole reason around why do you need to have the omnichannel and what is an omnichannel?
Right. What does that mean?
The word is out there, but they don't really comprehend what does that mean.
Mm-hmm. I was having a conversation with a dealer here in the States earlier today. We're doing some research on sort of their buying journey for digital retailing. And it's interesting to hear how the progressive dealers have been all about, how do I modernize the customer experience? And that seems to be where a lot of people were leading, the conversation in their own organizations until COVID. And then everybody's like, oh, wait, this could be really great for productivity too. And so we were just talking about how it's never like that immediate hurt, that we're all responding to, but it's that aha moment. And that's sort of what the omnichannel stuff I think brings.
That's why these podcasts are just so much fun, because what we've found is that we would be spending a lot of time educating not just dealers, but even just people who work within the OEMs. Mm-hmm. There would be countless times I'd go through different organizations and you'd have to retrain, or not retrain, but just get people up to speed. This is how a dealer works. You'd get an influx of people into the organization. OEMs were really good at trying to bring in FMCG into the auto industry, but then the dealers wouldn't relate to a lot of the principles. So we found that we were spending all this time just going through, this is how the auto business thinks, this is how consumers operate, and these are the pros, these are the cons, but just re-educate. But then the downside also is that there are people in the OEMs that are so blinkered into thinking this is just how it has to be. And when something new comes in, they can't adjust to it, or or whether it's a pivot or even just a minor move to open up their thought pattern to, yes, maybe we should go down that road because we've always done it this way, so therefore we must do it this way. So our mission, if you like, with our series is it's one of enlightenment, but this one, when I saw your conversation with David, that was an eye-opener for me. So yes, we've got to get Michelle on the show to give your insights and your expertise, because the journey that you share is the journey that many need to be undertaking now, or actually they should have been undertaking 5 years ago. But if you're not on that road now, you won't be here in 5 years.
Yeah, it's tough. I think that I know we talked, Mark, about how the pandemic has maybe been a bit shorter of a time period for you guys than it is here in the States, but I think it was a forcing function for the future. So that was a big wake-up call, I think, for even dealers here. I don't think it's just internationally. I think in general, change is hard and it's hard to contemplate. And until it's an absolute requirement, there's a lot of people that will just sort of sit and wait. Anyways, I know we're getting into some of the content of the actual.
Very, very true. Now, you're a car person, because I'm going to open up with talking about a bit of history for yourself, because your backstory is very interesting. You started out your career at eHarmony, so you've gone from a human digital platform to then real estate. Is that correct?
Other way around. Started in real estate, went into dating, and then into cars.
Okay, I think it's on the list, is that we want to really get your understanding of is there a similarity between all three?
I think there definitely is. I mean, I think that the big similarity is you're connecting people with people. Whenever you're doing that, it's always about getting to know both sides of that equation. It's sort of like a marketplace, right? You have to understand the supply and the demand at great lengths. So whether it's, people looking for houses, it's people looking for cars, or people looking for other people. It's really, how deeply do you understand your customers and their needs and desires? And in my position at each of these companies, from a marketing point of view, that is what it's all about. And I like to tell people I may not necessarily be the ultimate car person, but I am the ultimate customer person. And I spend hours upon hours talking to customers every single week, just trying to live in their shoes.
A wise mentor of mine told me early in my career, in fact, John and I worked with him later in my career. He told me, your customers will put you out of business if you get it wrong. And you need to always just go back to the customer, which is why the customer metrics are the critical ones that we've been always working with. And it's interesting that you start with the customer first and work backwards.
Always. And customers are both sides of that equation, right? So whether it's the consumer or in our space, the retailer, deeply understanding where they come from is, I always say, that the fastest way to successful positioning of your company and successful business in general. Because if you don't understand them, like you said, it's the fastest way out of business. I like that. I hadn't heard that before. But you have to be able to walk in their shoes. If you don't know what their pain points are that you're solving, if you're not solving big problems, you become irrelevant.
Relevance is a strong word. That is such a powerful word. That actually comes through. John, how many podcasts we hear that word just resonate? Trust comes through. You've got to be relevant, and complexity is bad. And
our industry is full of complexity, which I think is what a lot of the newer technology is aiming to solve. Because I have another saying that which is that you can't really modernize the customer experience until you modernize the selling experience. I think that's a big piece of that omni-channel part, Mark, that we were talking about too.
Yeah, maybe just to start off, Michelle, can you tell us a bit about Roadster and the type of services you offer, just to get a background of where you come from and your approach to the market?
Yeah, absolutely. So Roadster is what we like to call a digital sales platform that sits in the digital retailing category that has been the big buzzword of the last many years, especially this year. But the reason we call it a platform is because we think beyond what I think most people deem as digital retailing, which is the ability to sell cars online. And so our platform goes deep into the dealership sales process and figuring out how to digitize a lot of what they do inside the store from, a salesperson perspective, so that it's really creating a seamless and consistent experience for the consumer from the time they start online to the time they might finish that transaction in the showroom. So our tools and functionality are all built with the consumer in mind, but also the salesperson in mind, and how they interact through the technology with the customer to navigate them through the process.
So Michelle, do you also do the transaction online?
We do. So that's what I think people talk to, digital retailing is more like e-commerce. So the end-to-end transaction, to us, that's like table stakes. Like you have to be able to do that and do that well. And then the next layer is, okay, well, how do you connect that with the showroom experience and give the team in-store tools to navigate that process? Because even today with COVID, there's only a certain percentage of consumers that will buy the car sight unseen 100% online. The rest of them are going to have an omni-channel experience where they come into the showroom, to take over from wherever they started. And so our goal and our mission is to be able to enable dealers to use our software with every customer.
Yeah, Michelle, you mentioned omnichannel. I'm keen to get the real definition of omnichannel for our listeners, because there's a bit of conjecture out there. Can you please explain omnichannel and how does it work?
Yeah, so from my perspective, omnichannel is connecting the online experience with the in-store experience and having it be a seamless and continuous process. So I like to say it's how you avoid the Groundhog's Day of buying a car, where I always talk about it like again, more of like a marketing 101, right? You never want to promote something that you can't deliver on. So if you put out there this whole concept of you can buy a car online from me, and they start the process and they do a bunch of stuff, and then you come into the showroom and the salespeople act like you never did any of that and ask you to do all of that stuff again, that's really, really frustrating, right? That's worse than not giving them the opportunity to start online, because now you've wasted their time.
Yeah, I think you see a lot of companies doing that, where you have to verify yourself, like some government departments and that. You verify your identity, and then when you actually start to speak to someone, you start from the beginning again. So it's actually quite frustrating.
Right.
And I think now that you mentioned it, I thought that's a good example.
Yeah, it's like calling the phone company. That's usually my go-to example. If you've ever had to call, and I don't know if it's this way out where you are, but if you ever call the phone company, you get daisy chained into different departments. And every time you get transferred to somebody else and you explained your whole situation and what happened and why you're frustrated, you have to then go and start again and explain all of that again. And that's a really, really frustrating experience. And unfortunately, it happens quite a bit in our industry, where people do as much as they can online, and then they get into the showroom and the dealership just has no idea that they did those things. So connecting that together is what I think omnichannel really is about.
And I think another good example is your live chat. If someone comes on and has some discussions with the dealer, they go away, come back 2-3 weeks later, the system will automatically pick up where you left off. So the salesman doesn't ask you the same questions again. And I think it's just small things, but it increases the efficiency of the whole, transaction or what's happening. So I think every time we repeat something, it's wasted time and wasted resources, which you have to pay for somewhere.
Yeah, I was talking to a dealership earlier today who was telling me their favorite feature of our platform is actually this little breadcrumb that we put into the back of the system, which shows you everything that the customer did, what they browsed for, what maybe deal terms they played with, did they try to get an estimate of their trade-in? Because even if the customer just stops at some point in that process, when they engage with them, they can pull that all up and they understand where maybe they got hung up, right? Like if they started to evaluate their trade and they stopped, maybe they didn't like the valuation they saw, or, they were looking at these two vehicles and they're uncertain as to which one they want to buy. So let me help them with this. It's helping the salesperson be more educated before they re-engage with the customer. And so I think there's so much value in that concept of picking up where the customer left off. And some of it's just simple things like that. Like just here's the breadcrumb of what that customer did online. Before you call them and engage with them, take a look so you know what they did.
That has always been, as an OEM, one of the biggest frustrations is we used to track the journey of the client online, and then we'd lose visibility as soon as they got to the showroom. So we didn't know whether they actually went to the showroom, whereas from a dealer side, they can actually track it even further by if they fill out the forms, etc. And that's interesting, what you say about the coaching of the sales consultant, where if they did spend time down the journey, you can see them tracking through, get to the valuation. Valuation is not what they particularly wanted. It shows the balking of maybe they don't go to the next step. Is that a blocking point? Is this where the sales manager then would come in and coach that consultant and say, right, with that lead, what do we need to do with that particular lead and the strategy around that?
Yeah, it's definitely an opportunity to coach. It's also an opportunity to empower, meaning that the salesperson has that at their fingertips themselves. So even just having it without the coaching is helpful, right? Because now I can see, I'm going to call this customer. I can see exactly what they were looking at. And now I can have a conversation about that. Yes. And yes, on both sides. And a lot of that really comes from, and John, you were asking a minute ago about the history of Roadster. We are a digital sales platform, but the history is kind of interesting. And it's the reason it's interesting is because we started as a direct to consumer company. I don't know, actually, Mark, in our pre-call, I don't know if we talked about that, but our founder actually doesn't come from automotive. Our founder comes from the fashion industry, where he was part of the time when people never thought they'd buy clothes online, and he was at the forefront of that. And so when he turned to the auto industry, it was sort of like what other industry is like fashion was that really needs to modernize. And so he got his gang back together of engineers and user experience designers, and they tackled this industry by purchasing a small car brokerage in the San Francisco area in California. And they just started to learn the business and automate the process of selling cars. At the heyday, before we pivoted to direct to dealer, we were selling 150 cars online using our own software. And so the software that we now license and white label for car dealerships is the same software we used when we were selling cars ourselves. So we've been there, we've used it, we know it's possible. But a lot of that sort of breadcrumbing and understanding what the customer did, a lot of that came from that time frame.
Michelle, from your experience, what do you think are the main digital tools that the automotive industry is starting to embrace? How do you see it trending, or what's happening in the market?
Yeah, I think, I'll maybe answer that two ways. Pre-COVID and what's happening sort of, I just can't say post. I wish I could say post like you guys can, I think, out there in Australia. I think pre-COVID, the big change was that dealerships were really focused on modernizing the customer experience because they knew that there were other industries that were educating customers on what was possible to do online. And then you had a lot of what we call new dealer model threats coming into the market, like the Teslas, the Carvanas, right, in the US. And so there was definitely a sense that there was momentum behind this is the way that consumers want to purchase vehicles. And so there was energy around how do I modernize the customer experience? I think when the pandemic hit, what sort of shifted was that people not only needed to now do this. It wasn't just a nice to have, be great if we could be as modern as Tesla or as modern as Carvana or Apple or, fill in the blank, but it became a necessity because at least here in the US, there were many states where dealerships couldn't sell in person anymore for a time period. They had to only sell online. And so it became a forcing function that became much more about remote sales activity than it was necessarily just about a great customer experience. When it became part of the operation, it became part of how are we going to have any kind of business continuity, it became a lot more impactful, to the day-to-day. And so I think it shifted. I think now, and we just did a survey, it was part of our dealer impact study that we conducted in September, where we asked dealerships, what's the one thing that you've learned this year that you are planning to keep, right? Everybody did a lot of different things, tried on a lot of different ways to do business. I think as an industry, we were extremely creative and resilient as it relates to what was happening when things shut down. But I think the one thing that resonated with, it was almost 100% of those that we surveyed, was that this idea of remote selling makes their dealership more efficient. That I think is true. I think we are now in this situation where it's not just about, I'm going to plug this into my website and enable people to buy cars online. Now we're in like phase 2, which is, and we're going to be proactive about it. We're not going to just let them do that and then quickly try to make the appointment. we're actually going to encourage the behavior, because the more they do online, the less time they spend in store and the less time my people need to spend with them. And so we're seeing these huge productivity gains of salespeople being able to sell more units per person. And so I think that's driving a lot of dealerships to consider these tools as mandatory sales process enablers.
And what was the specifics when you talked about that productivity? So if you do a productivity time and motion study, etc., which bits did it save? Where did you find the key savings in cost and time, and then the uplift in profitability?
Yeah, I think from a cost and time perspective, if you look at the way that we have been selling cars for decades, it's a very linear process when somebody's in the showroom with you, right? Your salesperson is not going to get up and leave you to go handle another customer that walked in the door. They might leave for a minute to go to the desk or, get another pencil or, what have you, but they're not going to leave because of another customer. And so with that, you figure they're spending 2, 3, 4+ hours with one individual customer finishing that transaction. Now with the ability to do a lot of it remotely, you can work with multiple customers at the same time. And so where you would never fathom, and I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, that just get up from the customer and say, I'll be right back. There's another customer walked in the door. Time becomes less linear digitally, meaning as a customer, I might come in and do my credit app and then, do some work for the day and then come back and maybe finish my trade information or look at my, finance options. And so because there's time delays like that, it's like little micro moments versus one lump amount of time. Now the salesperson can work with a lot of different customers at different stages. So I actually think it's not that there's a lot being taken out of the process, although I will tell you there's a sentiment that the salespeople can put the customer to work. And I say it that way specifically because I think as an industry, we always talk about empowering the customer. And it is, because the customer wants to be put to work. But I like to say it like that because I think it makes dealerships really think about, putting the customer to work is a different mindset. It means that there's less work for me. And in this world and where we are as consumers generally, we're so used to self-service and doing a lot of this stuff ourselves. So I think there's a lot to be said in how do you work with multiple customers at one time, and that's what's driving the efficiency.
So the self-service bit makes the big difference because the customer's filling out their personal detail, they're getting their driver's license, they're doing all the work that someone in the dealership would normally have to manually enter, and that's part of that linear process. So they go off, do their the customer goes off and in between doing other Zoom meetings, etc., fills out their forms. That sales consultant could have 3 or 4 customers on the go at that time, and the customers would not be feeling that they're getting they're getting less service than the person next to them, which they would be getting in a showroom. That's
right. And I think they appreciate it more because it's on their time, right? One of the data points that we've been watching for a while, this is not related necessarily to the pandemic and what's happening now, but we've always seen that 30% of the deal-making activity is happening when the stores are closed. If you think about that just by itself, they can't physically walk into your showroom, but they're doing that behavior at 11 o'clock at night in their pajamas, right? So it's on your time. And if you think about your own, shopping experience and anything else you buy, like I was last night shopping for holiday presents for my children at about 11 o'clock at night. So that's when I had time to do that, right? So I think people really appreciate it being on their time. And a lot of that stuff is much more transactional in nature. And the fun stuff is really driving the car and taking delivery and building relationship. It's not fill out your credit app. Like that's not fun. So let's get that out of the way ahead of time so that we can leave room for that relationship to shine.
Yeah, but I think even in the handover process, getting product information, understanding, for simple things, how to work your radio and that can all be done online. You can send videos. The customer can experience that instead of having the salesman sit there trying to explain it to the customer.
Yeah, that's right.
And then the customer being overwhelmed with so much information that he can't remember it all anyway.
Right.
And then he has to go online anyway to learn it.
Yeah, I definitely think that was true during my last purchase. I was not listening to half of what they were telling me about my car. I just wanted to get home and experience it. But, 2-3 days later, you're like, shoot, how does the radio work? Or how do I set up my phone? So I 100% agree with you, John.
Michelle, in terms of the main problems that you solve, or that Roadster solves, what would you say are the real problems it solves for both the dealer and the customer?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it really comes down to 3 main areas. One would be engagement with the customer. Like I said, 30% of that activity is happening after hours. And so, so much of our industry is dependent on autoresponders and just, trying to make the appointment, maybe not being as transparent as we should be about the price, So what's happening is that we really aren't always answering the question that the customer actually has when they submit a lead into our dealership to begin with. So regardless of the source, wherever that, customer came from. So I definitely think with digital retailing, what you are able to do is really respond to all of the questions, because you're basically putting the levers in the hands of the customer. So if they want to know pricing, they can go look at the price, they can, pull the levers, see what the payment is and what works for them. If they want a trade valuation, they can do that. So there's so much capability for them to self-service and answer their own questions that I think, whereas maybe consumers would stop the engagement or be shy to even submit a lead and get contacted by the dealership, they now have this all available for them. You can get that customer further down the purchase funnel just by being transparent and providing them with that capability up front. So that's one. The second one is, I think, what we've all felt with what's happened this year, which is around the inefficiencies of our sales process. And so, whereas in the past, we might have 5, 6, 7 people touching each individual deal, that's really something that can be very streamlined. And the technology allows, because it empowers the salesperson so much to do, the penciling, and it depends on how far the dealership wants to go. They can pretty much create take the deal from A to Z type of environment for their salespeople. That streamlining, that, not having friction within the sales process is a big problem that we really strive to solve for many of our customers. And then the last one may seem obvious, but customer satisfaction would be the other. So much of the dealership benefits from high customer satisfaction. So whether that means increased loyalty or repeat business, referrals, a lot of them are incentivized by the manufacturers also to have high scores. So I think there's a lot of value in how do I make sure I've got a consistent experience that people are going to rate me very highly on, so that it increases future business for my dealership.
That's the Holy Grail, the trifecta there: engagement with the customer, the inefficient sales process, and streamlining that, and the customer satisfaction, loyalty, and referrals. John, that sounds like one of our old SLT meetings. How can we get that done? How can we improve?
It's always a big challenge, so to try and get it all together. So
that's fantastic. Now, Michelle, a question for me. What do you feel needs to change in the industry?
That's a really good question. I mean, I'm so proud of our industry in a lot of ways that we have been resilient and open to change. I think, when I first entered this industry 15 years ago, I don't know that was as much the case as it is today. I would say the one thing that is going to be a challenge if we don't change is our willingness to change. Does that make sense what I'm saying? We have a tendency to have a mentality as an industry that if it isn't broken, don't fix it. Instead of, I think, what a lot of companies have, which is, how do we do this better? And so I think the big obstacle to overcome is falling back to old ways, old behaviors, old process. And that's where I feel like if we do that, we're really going to lose our ability to move forward, as an industry, because we've got the people like Tesla and Carvana and others, on our heels that are doing really innovative things. And whether the dealership is in a market that is, a competitive environment, consumers are very aware that exists as an option. I think that's the biggest thing is the one thing that needs to change is the feeling that we don't want to change.
In terms of what's happened so far, what do you think are the main things that have changed recently in the industry? Where have you seen the main changes in the US?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has a lot to do with figuring out how to do things remotely. Like I said before, I think that's probably the biggest shift. I've seen dealerships here, whether it means digital retailing or video conferencing, like what we're doing now, or even doing things like a contactless test drive. Like I just think we're learning things and trying things that we never would have done before. So I think that there's an openness to how do we do this better. A lot of it is driven though by safety concerns and demand issues, as it relates to what's happening in the industry here in the US. But I think it's fascinating. That's why we did that dealer impact study to begin with, because when the dealership shut down, I was like, oof, there's never going to be another, well, knock on wood, there's never going to be another time where something this big is going to be a forcing function of change in our industry. And so we immediately went to work to study what the impact of that was and continue to. We've done 2 waves. We'll probably do another one at the top of the year also to just try to keep track of what is changing and evolving. But I would say in general, people are figuring out how to do more with less, and whether that is temporary or permanent, I think is to be determined. We've had a rough year, so there's a lot of retailers here in the States that have had to unfortunately cut staff just to be prepared and from a cost perspective. But what I am very positive on is this idea that because they did that, they proved that their people can sell more cars per person. So when we come back to whatever normalcy looks like, they'll be able to sell even more.
Because what's been interesting for us is the dealers here did the same. They cut staff, but it's been actually a very profitable period for them.
Mm-hmm.
For 2 reasons. There was government support. So government support for paying the staff costs. And then the second thing is the supply and demand. Because government incentivized certain sectors of the industry, there was big demand for certain vehicles. And so there's a big shortage of vehicles because a lot of factories have closed down. So your used cars are in short supply. So dealers have been making really good margins in that. So they've actually been very profitable. But I think Mark and I have had a lot of discussions, and we think it's not going to go back to that normal again. And I think the dealers are not going to. I think it's right what you said. They've sort of said, well, we can get by like this. I think we'll keep that sort of model in the future.
So very similar here in the States. They may not be selling as many vehicles, although demand has come back, right? I think one of the things we're seeing is that people are spending a lot more time in their vehicles than in airplanes. So the car buying process hasn't slowed down like I think a lot of us thought might happen. But the margins are higher because the demand may outweigh, even if it's not quite where it was, outweighs the supply, because we have the same thing. We've got issues with, new vehicle inventory. You've got used cars being something that everybody's trying to adopt more and more of because they can't keep them on the lot. So I do think that dealerships are finding that this model is a lot more profitable, partly because they are doing more with less and making more per vehicle doing that. So it'll be interesting to see. And I guess you guys are maybe a little ahead with things being more open, but it'll be interesting to see as things sort of go back to regular supply, what happens with, the dealerships and how much of this they keep when the profitability gets a little bit less than what I think they're seeing right now, just because there'll be so much inventory on hand again.
It's interesting with the supply and demand metrics. We talk about the 101 of price of economics. Now, Michelle, I'm keen to get an understanding. Like we're sales guys, and I'll use this next question may seem like a strange one, but how do you measure success? Well, we always talk about sales volumes, but what are the metrics that matter that we're using your system? What are the key metrics to say, right, that's a leading indicator that's going to equal more of these?
Yeah, I think that the biggest one in our platform is utilization. I don't know that that's much of a surprise, but definitely, I have a saying that I've talked a lot about, and you guys might have heard it before, which is using the technology, being successful with digital retailing. It's really 20% the technology and it's 80% what you do with it. It's not to minimize what we bring to the table. It just means that it really has to do with the adoption and how well the dealership has really embraced it within their sales process. For us, we are constantly measuring utilization and how much of it, how are they using it? So we have, 5 different levels of adoption that we map to, and we're constantly working with dealerships to get from level 1 to level 5. So I think that's the biggest one, because I think that's a huge leading indicator of success.
So what would level 1 be?
Yeah, so I can walk through the steps. So level 1 is just online utilization. This is kind of like I plug it into my website because I want to sell cars online and I want to look like I have a modern experience. And, I want to make sure that I'm staying ahead of the competition, right? Offer something that nobody else is offering. Level 2 is similar. The difference is that you become very proactive with the tool. And so from a proactive standpoint, it means that you're not just sitting passively and waiting for consumers to engage within your capabilities online, but your sales team is proactively guiding customers through the process online, kind of like what we talked about before, right? Working with multiple customers at once, encouraging them to take steps, on their own time. So that typically is the role of somebody that's maybe in the business development center or the internet team, right? That's taking phone calls or responding to leads to sort of guide them through and get as much as they're comfortable doing before the appointment done. And then level 3, 4, and 5 is really about that omnichannel experience we were talking about. It's about how do I connect the experience that happened online to the showroom. So a level 3, they might use it as a presentation tool. Pre-COVID, it was, I'm going to hand you the mouse and let you drive. Now I think it's, I'm going to share this link to your phone so that you can use the safety of your own device versus a shared device. But it's really about that transparency and shared experience within the showroom. And then level 4 and 5 are really about using it with every customer, just different levels of that.
So that's incredible. So for me, level 2 sounds like level 5, where they're actually proactively getting out and using it. But there's actually a lot more to the journey. So level 3, you're letting, or the sales consultant pre-COVID would say, here we are, you've gone down this journey online. I'm aware of your journey. I'm not making you rehash that so that you feel that we have had a relationship for quite a while. We now get down to this point. The trust is there. Pre-COVID, you would say, here is the mouse. We're doing some interactivity with the vehicle, with the specs and the options. You're clicking, you're getting the customer to click the finance options themselves. And then they can actually work on the valuation. They could say, here's the valuation we've got on your car. They could then say, they could enter in, I want it this much for the car.
General terms, yes. They don't enter the value in. There's not a negotiation on the trade-in per se in the application. But yes, they're entering all the information. And I think that the big thing to realize is that when the customer comes into the showroom, when you're a level 3, you're checking in that customer and pulling up everything they did ahead of time so that they can finish what they started online. And at that point, you're using, so it is level 2, it's just sort of like level 2 plus, where you guided them through as much as they're willing to do online. And then when they come in, you're connecting that experience together, turning the screen, handing the mouse and saying, okay, let's finish this process together. I'm here as your coach or as your concierge to sort of talk you through the options. Like maybe you didn't pick your service and protection plan. So let's talk about those a little bit. Or I see you uploaded your trade. Are you good with that? No, let's go take a look at your car. So I think those things make it a lot more interactive, but it becomes a shared experience. It makes the customer part of the process.
Is there even how they sit with each other in the showroom with the desk? Is it sort of a round table so that they're facing the same way and all this sort of stuff? Are these little idiosyncrasies that you can change so that it's not an adversarial us them? It's, let's work on the best deal for you.
For sure. I've seen all sorts of different versions of this, and it really depends on the dealership. But I've seen where the computer is sort of at the end of the desk and you're both sort of sitting facing it. I've seen it done on a kiosk, right? Where they've got these big kiosk screens touch screens where the customer can go and, touch everything and the salesperson is just standing next to them. So it just really depends. But I do think, to your point, it changes the dynamic because it is no longer you're sitting on the other side of the desk and I sort of have this authoritative view. It's much more of a partnership.
Now, Michelle, a question for me, because quite interested in you. We've mentioned the metrics of so many units per salesperson, and you mentioned levels of 18 compared to 12. But in your white paper, you also spoke a lot about the roles are starting to change. Because I was dealing with a dealer out of Stockholm, and they drove this whole online experience. And he found when he first started, the salesman was dealing online with customers and they're doing the transaction. But then he got so busy that he needed to bring in other staff to be doing the actual test drive or delivery work or whatever, because his online salespeople were doing a pretty good job. Do you think that's going to change, or where do you see the future in that?
Yeah, I mean, we did ask quite a bit about that in our dealer impact study because we were hearing some interesting sort of staffing models. I think the contraction of the employee base made us really reflect on the types of capabilities we need our employees to have. And so I think it is blurring the lines. So one of the things that we found was that when we asked people back in May what roles they thought would change, most of it came down to either that sort of internet or business development center role or the showroom team. So it was always kind of on the sales side, at least on variable ops, because that was what the study was on. And then when we came back around in September and asked them what did change, what we saw was a lot more investment in this sort of internet BDC team. And it's not for everybody. I think every dealership is different. What it comes down to is the skill sets we actually need to be successful. Because one of the things that I saw personally in talking to a lot of our partners in the beginning of the pandemic was they scaled back so much that the leadership team was actually selling cars. And so they learned firsthand what it took and what it meant and what kind of process changes they needed to put in place. So as they brought back people, they were thinking about who would be best suited to follow this process. And I think that it was a very different thought process for a lot of dealerships than who is my best selling salesperson. I think there's a lot of people with pretty significant, portfolios of clients just didn't follow the rules, didn't follow a process. They just sort of sold a lot of cars themselves. And when push came to shove, they were looking at, okay, we want to create a repeatable process. So maybe we should look for the people that are process driven. A little bit about the technology. I think technology savviness is important, but really process driven was the key that we saw sort of rise to the top as it relates to what they needed. And frankly, customer service driven as well. Are they here to support the customer? They have that mentality. Are they technologically savvy? Are they process oriented? Those characteristics rose above the ability to be a strong negotiator. It's not to say that's not important, but I think that's where we saw the tilt happen.
Because the customer's researching and has all the information now, they're educated to be online. If you're not focusing on that customer experience, they've got the information anyway. So if you feel that the old ways of a strong negotiator, because you've got information that the customer does not have, puts you in a stronger position, whereas now that's not the case. And then you've got to drill back into what is the actual problem for the customer that you're solving with your product and or service that you're selling with it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And the tech savviness, because if you reject the fact that, or don't understand the fact that they've actually gone down this tech journey and you're not speaking the same language as them, the tech that they've been using, then the trust isn't there.
Although I would say don't confuse the need for technology savviness with age. We have some of our best salespeople are the tenured salespeople. Once they get it, they love the technology. So I know that we tend to do that in our brains, like, oh, we need the millennials or whatever generation, right? We need the younger generation because they're going to be more technologically savvy. But it is less about that, and it's more about mindset and adaptation.
In your study paper, the units per sales consultant, in in this country and a lot of the industry benchmarks, it's 10 units per sales consultant per month. When you think of how long it takes to sell a car and then get it prepared and then do the handover delivery experience, 10 units provides a reasonable income for a sales consultant. Obviously, more is good, but then there's usually a tipping point where if it's too many, then the customer service bit drops away because the closeness, if you like, or the intimacy is not there between the consultant and the customer. But in your paper, you've noted that with the technology, the sales per unit, or sort of per person, has significantly increased. Now 18, is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. I think what's interesting is we've assumed for, actually, it turns out like over 35 years, at least I have not yet. I need to ask actually my friends at NADA if that's when they started tracking that or when that became the benchmark. But for 35 years, the average units per salesperson has been, I think it's 10.1 to be exact. And so it's been consistent until now. And I think really the driver is the technology is allowing them to do that more efficiently. But to your point about, is there a tipping point where the relationship turns? I think that we've moved that also because now that they can handle so much of it digitally, the relationship is really what's left to shine, right? So they can have that engagement and can build that relationship because they're pushing so much of the transactional elements into a digital format. But yeah, I think one of the big ahas I've had is it's almost like the way that we've planned as an industry has stopped us from being more productive because that 10 units is in every staffing model with every dealership that I've talked to, right? This is how we plan. If each person on average could sell 10, I need this many salespeople. And so that limits how much each salesperson can sell. See, so it's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think one of the big things that we've learned during this time frame is to reset the bar and say, my expectation for each of my salespeople is more. And then your staffing model is quite different.
So Michelle, you must collect a huge amount of data from your platform. Have you seen any trends over COVID and the lockdown? Are there particular trends that you've picked up from that data?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple for sure. So one is the percentage of consumers that are engaging in online transactions. From our own data, when we looked at this sort of pre-COVID, when you looked at what percentage of the transactions at any given dealership were happening online, it was more like 15%. And as we got to the peak of, a lot of the closures, we were up to a third of transactions that were happening in an online capacity. Now, some of that's the only way that those dealerships could sell cars. And so, that number has come back down a little bit since then, but it's still stayed quite elevated. So I think what's interesting is, and actually one of our dealer partners made this great comment along the way. He said, what are we going to do if we take longer to sell cars after this pandemic's over? People are going to say, it didn't even take me this long during a pandemic. Why is it taking me this long now? And so I think we've educated, whether we wanted to or not, just based on need, we've educated the market that this is possible. And that's one of the biggest things that I think was lacking, when in the early days with this is most consumers didn't know that they could start this transaction online. And now, through this time period, everybody has had to promote it. And so it's just elevating the capability across the board. So that's one. I think definitely the activity. The other thing I would say is, like I said before, the utilization levels across the stores. Whereas once it was maybe a novelty, for certain stores, it was relegated to a team. They might have like an express store team. We now see it permeating, throughout the dealership. And I think that has a lot to do with what I was saying before about the leadership having to do some of this themselves and really recognizing it and being a champion for making this part of their sales process.
Now, Michelle, question for me, what did the winning dealers do?
Yeah, I think the winning dealers really thought very hard about how they're going to make this part of their process as on a permanent basis. And, we always say that there's really one thing that sets a successful dealer apart from somebody that's not as successful when it comes to this. And that really is their ability to optimize their process. It's not about whether or not you're in a metro area or you've got a large volume of cars or you're a luxury brand or not. It's really about, do you have somebody that really is going to focus on making sure that this is how you do business moving forward? And so it's partly your process, it's partly having some kind of digital retail champion in the store that's going to really shape this moving forward. So those that are really successful are those that have that champion. Sometimes it's them, right? Sometimes it's the buyer that is that champion. Sometimes it's somebody else, but really having somebody that's driving it. And, it's like anything else. It's not a set and forget. It definitely takes time to figure out how it's going to work for each individual dealership. So it's that commitment to optimizing over time as well that makes them successful. I can usually tell within the first 15 minutes of talking to one of our partners why they're an advocate. I'll hear things like, when we were looking at different digital retailing providers, we really started to map out our sales process. And so when we were talking to the providers, we knew exactly what we wanted to make sure we could do. It's like, okay, you're a process person. Got it. That's why you're successful. So I think it really comes down to the buy-in and that champion in the store.
Now, Michelle, we sort of spoke about in the beginning that if someone doesn't engage in omnichannel and online and that there's a high risk that they might not be around in 5 years. So in terms of the losers, can you tell us a bit about what the losers didn't do? And can they overcome that and get on track quite quickly? Or how long would it take for them to catch up?
I mean, first of all, I don't think that there's like winners and losers. I think we all have an opportunity. Maybe that's my optimism in life. I do think that there are a lot of people that, especially during this pandemic, did a little bit of panic buying, right? And they just took something and said, we've got to have the ability to sell cars online. So we're just going to plug it in and hope for the best. And I think the people that plugged it in and hoped that it would just sort of rain additional sales online are the people that are going to need the most coaching moving forward, because to me, it's not necessarily about the fact that you've got the capability. It's what you do with it. And so they need to adopt it more holistically. They don't have to boil the ocean. They don't have to do it all at once. And I think that's the big scare, honestly. Like when I say omnichannel and people understand what that means after they sort of talk about it, the fear is they're going to have to overhaul everything. And that actually is not what really is happening. What it is it's looking at your existing sales process, where are the friction points, and figuring out how the technology can be incorporated. And like I said, it doesn't have to happen all at once. That's why we have those implementation levels, because you can be a really successful dealership with digital retailing with a very strong internet BDC that's guiding people to do as much online as possible. It's how do you phase it? We have some dealerships that just sort of ripped the Band-Aid off and did it all at once, but those are pretty rare.
So that's a pretty powerful summary. I think so you look at the process, what are those friction points, and then how do you implement it? So how do you implement your system with your dealers? Because if they look at the various systems out there, do you have a field team that goes out and supports them in that, or is there a central, or is there online, or is it like a Zoom setup that you have where you go, right, this is how you should be doing it? Well, what's the process to embed and just give them comfort to overcome any potential resistance to the system or adoption to the system?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And we are so proud of our customer support. I think the industry that knows, that is a value that we provide to everybody. At least I love hearing about it. When I talk to our dealer partners, they'll always comment on, oh, you're so-and-so success manager is so great. But what we wanted to do at the outset was make sure that we had the support in the field for the sales teams at the dealership. We didn't want to have software that they just turn on and figure out. So we actually have both an implementation team and a success team that is dedicated to onboarding that dealership, making sure that the technology is working, but then also sitting down with the leadership team at that store and talking through their process and making sure that before we train their team on the technology, we really understand how they want to use it. So that's part of that implementation levels and coaching and guidance that we give. But that success team is there, and our support for them is there 24/7. For the dealership is there onboarding and iterating, and we're constantly retraining. It's a little different right now because of what's going on in the world. We used to go spend 2 to 3 days in the dealership and train and sit down with the leadership team and then train, each individual at the store. Now we're doing that remotely, just out of necessity. But we look forward to seeing everybody in person at some point here in the future. And then on top of that, we also have invested in an online learning platform. So we call it Roadster Academy. And so there we've got certifications and courses and materials for all of their agents to actually learn and dive into the technology so that they're up to speed. So we try to get them certified before they actually start using the platform.
So it's not like the new guy that starts or new girl that starts on the showroom floor and like, here you go, here's an online program. Customer walks in, all right, can you just figure it out at the same time as the customer, et cetera?
Yeah, that's also a great question. So yes and yes. So we do have an online, like if you started tomorrow and we weren't set to do a retraining for a few weeks, let's say, with the store, then all of the online components are there so they can easily get certified. We have also heard from a lot of our partners that one of the benefits that we provide is our technology is so easy to use that they can get their salespeople up and running so much faster because the training, it's a digital sales process. So they really just need to learn the technology and walk the customer through. So it's reduced significantly a lot of the training time in onboarding new employees.
So Michelle, you've spoken about some really fantastic products, and it's been fascinating for us to listen to you today. So if someone wants to find out more information, where can they find more information about your platform and the services you offer?
So they can come to our website, which is just roadster.com. And not only do we have, information about our products, but we've got a whole resources section. So the white paper, that dealer impact study is there, as well as a lot of other white papers that we've done and best practices. We also really try to aggregate case studies for a lot of the stores that we work with. And, we always say, we don't think people want to hear from us. They want to hear from each other. So we try our best to surface the voices of other dealers so they can kind of see how they embraced it, what they did, through the process of onboarding with a platform and so on. So there's really great information in addition to the product. If people are just looking to learn, like, what does it take to actually implement something like this? What are some of the best practices? And then finally, we like to keep it real at Roadster. We're very approachable. So if somebody really does have questions, they can email me. My email address is just michele@roadster.com. They're more than happy to do that as well if they have questions.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Michelle. This has been a terrific, lots of insights. We've covered a fair bit today. Now, hopefully, Michelle, let me know if I've missed anything here. But just keen to summarise the key points of today, and it's been an eye opener for me with the trends that you're already seeing in the US, with still a lot of stores, a lot of dealerships needing to be closed because of COVID. We're very fortunate here in Australia right now. We're in a situation where all of our states now are open to trade. But it's interesting when your background, I think, is an amazing one. You talked about the real estate, the dating and the automotive industry being very similar, because ultimately you're connecting people, something that they really need, which is a fundamental of life, whether it be somewhere to live, someone to be with, or somehow to drive around. So, and similarities with people connecting. I think that was one thing that really stood out early in the conversation. But one thing that I really took away was the sales process and the digitization of that process, and having the customer piece fit in that, so that there isn't a disconnect between what is the physical experience and the online experience. And there's that multiple and different variations of. So you talked about embracing and the whole Omnichannel, where the showroom and the online is one, but not no two transactions, if you like, are the same potentially, because there's going to be different connections along the way, but making sure that your people in your showroom respect that, and the customer is actually the forefront in everything that you do. So modernising that customer experience is what you've seen is a key change. And one of the key benefits is that you can actually do multiple customers at one time, because the old style is linear. So multiple customers, and you actually put the customer to work. And it's a bit like, I think, if you go back to the old days when service stations used to serve you for fuel, we're conditioned to put fuel in your car and pay it in the store and go in and buy chocolates, etc. So actually spend more money through that business model, and we're happy to do that. We actually feel uncomfortable if someone serves us because, like, no, don't touch my car. I want to do that. But what it does, it actually brings back the fun stuff in the sales process, because all the manual stuff can be done online, and you can digitize that, which gets the efficiency back in, because the fun stuff becomes the handing over of the car, the final negotiations of the car, and the test drive of the car. So you can really put more energy into the good things about the process, and the manual stuff is actually done offline and at their own pace. And then we looked at what's changed is the world actually wants to do this stuff remotely, and you can actually do more with less. So you can get more sales, you can get more information out, you can build more trust with less people, and really in a shorter amount of time, direct time with those customers. So the efficiencies are there. And how do you measure success is, are they using the system? We've all been guilty of buying a gym membership or some sort of software package. We go, wow, we can do all that stuff, and I'm going to lose all this weight. I'm going to be super fit and do whatever. But if we don't actually use it, it's no good to us, and we don't get the full benefit out of what we invested in. So you've got your team that measure, and your key measure is, are you using it? And when you look at the adoption rates, there's that level 1 through to level 5, where level 1 is, I've got it. I've parked my gym membership just there. I've got an online presence. That's it. But then there's I'm using it, and I'm actually doing something with it. I'm proactive, and that's only level 2. And then you can get further interactive with it when customers come into your showroom, and then you're actually sharing the system together, which is part of this whole process of breaking down the barriers so that you feel at one with each other, and that's that trust. And then when we look at the efficiencies, the industry was 10 units per sales consultant. You're seeing with your system, you're at the 18 units per sales consultant. But what we saw in the traditional method, with the linear approach, if you got to 18, your CSI score, your customer satisfaction scores would drop, because you weren't spending enough time with the people because the process was so protracted. With your technology, you can get to 18 and actually have a higher customer satisfaction score, because you're getting back to the fun stuff again, and you're really engaging with the customers. So that's a really big plus. And then when we looked at what's changed, and I can't say coming back any to pre-COVID levels, but you saw it went from 15% of online transactions to 33%. Now it's come back a little bit, but as the journey continues, I'm with you. I think it's going to still continue to be at that higher percentage as the adoption increases, because the Carvanas of the world and the Teslas have forced the industry to go through this journey and change, because the winners have embraced that, and they've looked at, well, I've got to embed omnichannel in my business, because that's what the disruptors are doing. If I don't do it, I won't survive. And it comes down to looking at my process and having a champion in the business that keeps driving that. And without that champion, you go back to level 1 of adoption. I've got it, but no one's actually doing anything with it. So that's the winning strategy. The losing is just having a gym membership and not actually doing anything with it. So I think it's fantastic. And thank you very much for coming on today, because the key takeouts there definitely is process, friction point, and then how do you embed the system to overcome them? And that is a formula for success. And then having the face-to-face people to help you work through the system and continue to get the best out of it. Have I missed anything?
That was incredible. I actually think you said it better than I did.
Well, I just said what you said.
No, I think the gym membership, I might have to steal that, Mark. I think the gym membership is a great analogy. If you buy a gym membership and don't use it, it's wasted. Versus actually putting it, into action. And I love that. So I might have to take that one on.
Please do, because once again, I thank you for sharing your wisdom with us, because it's through the insights that you've got will change and bring and really highlight the opportunities for the industry. So it's key learnings for me, and it just reinforces the stuff that when you went through it. I just went through the list of the extensive 2 pages of notes that I took just then. It just makes so much sense, and it really stands out if you're not deep diving your process and then looking at digitizing it and taking out the menial stuff, but then focusing on the fun bits. And when you said the fun stuff is what makes this industry the best industry to be in, because there's always something new, and it's we don't sell washing machines, we sell stuff that's cool. Actually, I forgot to mention. I really acknowledge that you're a car enthusiast. So your current car's a X5, and you like driving it fast.
Yes, that is my current vehicle. I've always had fast cars. And I think I was telling you the story the other day that so previous to Roadster, I was at Edmunds here in the States. And one of the former CEOs there looked at me one day when I was in the middle of, purchasing a vehicle. And he's like, so you're a mom who likes to really drive fast. Like, you have a lead foot and you're a mother. It's like, I think you should go talk to somebody. Couldn't put those two things together. But yes, I think I get it from my dad. He's always been a sports car nut. And I just always had the need for speed, so to speak. So.
And your dream car, which blew me away, because it's on your website, so if anyone goes, when you go to Roadster, is a 57 Chev Bel Air. Amazing.
Yeah. I think my husband is aiming to maybe restore one of those as we get closer to my 50th. So we'll see. Well,
that's my toy in the background there. That's one that I've sort of been doing a little bit of work on. That's my 6th Camaro. So love the older American stuff there. There's some beautiful, beautiful design work there.
Yeah, Michelle, thanks very much. I think this has been a fascinating discussion. And I think from what you were saying that we now sort of maybe slightly back from 30%, but I think as Mark says, I think we can see that maybe going to 40, 50% over the next 3-4 years. And I think you guys at Roadster are leading the pace there. So thanks very much for sharing what you're doing in that. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah, happy to. And what I would say is for a lot of our dealerships, it's 100%, because it really is not just about the consumer starting it and going from start to finish. It's about the dealership making it part of their sales process and using it with every customer. So we've had dealerships on the platform that have been at 100% for years. I think that's actually the goal. It's not about selling cars online. It is, but it's also so much more, right? It's about how do we actually digitize this process, regardless of where the customer is, just to make it a lot more of a streamlined and efficient and delightful experience, should I say. So I have high hopes. Well, thanks for having me, you guys. It's been a pleasure.
That was fantastic.
No, really good. I think it's definitely where everything's heading. And if dealers aren't getting onto it, I think they're going to be left behind.
But the thing here, John, and this is the key learning, is, and you see it time and time again, when a product gets purchased, because there is the begrudging purchase, which is, we've got to get something to be online. And I think you had a conversation with the dealer about, we tried that chat and it didn't work because there wasn't a champion to actually drive the digitization of the process. They just have a process that's embedded, that it's the process is the process is the process. And in fact, a lot of dealers struggle to embed a process because there's a lot of it has been around personality. Oh, that's my sales guy or my GM of sales. He's been here for forever, and we just do this, and we just sell this many cars. And the brand has just coasted through because the brand has had this many people come through the showroom. So they just tick over. And I saw this back in the day when GM was a very strong brand here, is that we had some very good operatives, but also we had just a lot of customers coming straight through. And when customers were just walking in, it was like, we just knew that you release a new Commodore and there's going to be a lineup of people. So you were just meeting the demand. But as things tighten up, then you had to really be proactive in your digital journey. And that's when we see people like Philip Mance is so good at it because he's embraced the digital journey many years ago.
If it's taken from the very top of the dealership down through management, gets driven really well. And as you said, with Philip Mance. But then in other situations, they try and drive it through and they're sometimes not speaking to, it's not being driven through a champion in the organization. And they really have difficulties getting some of those processes implemented or stuff done because as you say, they're so busy with their other tasks, too difficult to start changing or doing something differently. Hi, Roddy. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, tick the bell below and like us on LinkedIn. If you'd like to know more about what we've said today, please reach out to either Mark Palavestra or myself, John Sinclair, on LinkedIn, and we can further assist you on any of the topics. And thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, John, and see you next week.